Emma and Tom Talk Teaching, a podcast about all things education, presented by Emma O'Dooher, Sian Wickersham and Tom Breeze. Easter Special 2026. Hello and welcome back to Emma and Tom Talk Teaching, where we're very pleased to have Emma with us and also her stunt double, Sian. So we've got a triple presenting situation for our infamous Easter light episode in time for the school holidays, where as ever we grab 3 random objects, items, clips, bits of text, and then frighten each other with them because nobody tells each other what we've got. So we're going to jump straight in. It's 2 each, 6 items in total, and Emma is going to start.
I am. So it's not very light, sorry.
We're often very heavy at Easter, aren't we? I don't know what it is about that end of the year that does that to us.
It's not heavy, it's just, it's education focused and it's about education research.
Very heavy. It's not AI is going to kill us all.
It's not AI is going to kill us
Easter
all.
offering.
Yeah, it's not AI is going to kill us all. So it's something that appeared on the newsletter of the Education Endowment Foundation that piqued my interest. Just to kind of give you a little flavour of what the newsletter says. So using research evidence, a concise guide, which is what they've produced, gives an overview of different types of education evidence, what they can be used for, and what their limitations might be. Education professionals are increasingly turning to research evidence to support the decisions they make in the classroom. It can help them make informed decisions about how to make the most of their resources, but there's an increasing amount of education research evidence available, as well as materials and products that make claims based on research. So it can be difficult and time consuming to make judgments about their reliability and usefulness. So what they have tried to bake into this guide are some sort of red flag warnings to look out for. So things like research that's funded by an organisation or individual who has a personal stake in the findings. The evidence is shared on a commercial website that benefits from the intervention. Because we've got a lot of different types of sources, haven't we? We've got books that have sort of taken the research evidence and they've already done that translation process into some close to practice content, and that might be a book or it might be, a professional learning offer. I'm thinking about Tom Sherrington and Oliver Cavaglioli's walkthroughs. They're a good example. But I think more frequently as well, we've got schools looking to the original research as well. So there's a lot of different forms out there. So they've produced this really user-friendly, concise guide. I think it's about 10 pages long in total. That sort of takes you through the process of, what is research evidence? What different types are out there? What are the red flag warnings? They've got a nice little acronym. They use something called claims that sort of takes you through a process of identifying any red flags and sort of thinking about the reliability of it and credibility of it. But then they've got a nice bit that talks about how you go beyond the surface of it. And lastly, and this is the bit that I'll just give you a flavour of, is a chapter entitled how can we use research evidence to inform practice. And this is something that we really do encourage our student teachers to do, not only when they're out on school placements sort of doing their day-to-day planning, teaching and evaluating lessons, but also we've got assignments that ask them to do just that. So they've got sort of a simple way of doing it. You've got sort of 2 columns, if you imagine. And on one column, you've got a header, which is assess needs and setting. And in the other column, you've got assess approach. And you've got one row which poses the question, is it right for our setting? And, in response to that, you're going to be thinking about the needs of the pupils in your setting, the setting itself. Is it right for our setting? And is it right for our setting in terms of the approach? And it sort of takes you through a process of thinking about that. So you might have read something, you might have, engaged with some sort of research, and then you'd ask yourself, so what's the problem and what's already going on in our school? Like, why have we turned to this piece of research? what problem are we trying to address, and what's the current state of play? So you're thinking about, identifying people needs, the root causes, understanding current practices and what influences them. And then when you're thinking about the approach and thinking, okay, is this going to be right for our setting? It's guiding you to ask, what does the research evidence suggest and how does it relate to our setting? So consider research evidence about what has worked elsewhere, consider how well the approach addresses the problem and fits the setting. And it was really refreshing because, it can be quite tempting to think, okay, well, this has got loads of evidence behind it. It's really compelling. I've done all my checks. I've looked at red flags. I've looked at the credibility of the source. So let's try it. But this step could be missed. And this is a really important step of, but is it right for our kids in our context, in our school? And this tool sort of guides you through that process of implementation and the decision making that you might do sort of around that. So I thought it was a useful one for student teachers, newly qualified teachers and practicing teachers alike. And obviously the Education Endowment Foundation are all about research-informed practice to narrow the poverty gap. And so I'm pleased to see that they've given this tool to sort of help people be critical about the stuff that they produce as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, isn't it? Because so often you sort of see this like one size fits all approach to research. Like, this is research informed, therefore we must all be doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually it's never that simple, is it? What works in one school wouldn't necessarily work in another school. And it really makes me think about kind of programs and stuff, because often there are a lot of red flags, aren't there, with specific education programs, and schools might implement them to fix a specific problem. So say you've got a maths fluency problem, getting some sort of times tables, other kind of maths fluency program in might be really helpful. But actually, that wouldn't necessarily be an issue in other schools. So they shouldn't just buy that because that other school has done it.
Yeah, and we've had the privilege over the years on the podcast of talking to some really great teachers, school leaders. I'm thinking about Gareth Rain, I'm thinking about Kelly Bubbins, go back and listen to those episodes, who have done the really good thinking, who've looked to research, but also know their context really well, and then can put together a very clear rationale about why they took certain parts of what they were researching, finding out, seeing, because I'm thinking about Kelly Bubbins talking about going to 3 different schools before they hit upon their Willow's Way approach. But then that criticality, that considering your own context, there are a lot of steps to that process that really, I would imagine, produce a higher rate of efficacy or create the circumstances in which this is going to land in your context.
Feels like these books that take education research, good old school education research, and then turn it into something a bit more usable for teachers. It feels like the rise of those has been really quite meteoric over the last 10 years or so. I don't know whether I was just not aware of it, but I don't feel like that stuff was quite as widespread perhaps when I was in the classroom. And you can see why it's important. I mean, any of us who've actually had to publish stuff in good old-fashioned journals, we know, the turnaround time is unbelievably long. The priorities of education research in journals are not quite the same as the priorities of some of this kind of, practical stuff. And so they are so very, very useful. But then you do sort of think, gosh, we probably are overdue a bit of a user's guide for how to use those successfully, and certainly there will be people who've got a bit of an axe to grind with some of that stuff. I'm really taken, just like you, I'm really taken with the fact that they're putting so much importance on actually don't even bother digging some of this stuff out and trying to use it until you really know yourself as a school and as a community. That feels more and more like the key to getting this stuff right.
Yeah, so I was really, really pleased to see that, and it being a tool that can guide you through that process. So have a little look at that, the EEF's new guide to help education professionals to make best use of research evidence.
We like a bit of EEF, don't we, round these parts? Got them on speed dial for these episodes. All right. I've got a friend of the podcast for us here, one David Didow, and he's got a Substack now. In fact, it looks like he's had it for a while. And on that Substack, he writes some very interesting stuff indeed, some very thoughtful stuff indeed. And I have brought, I'm afraid it's possibly going to be a little bit long. I've tried to abridge it as much as I possibly can. It's called Careless People, How Schools Become Places No One Wants to Work In.
Ooh,
Crikey.
very relevant.
Strap in.
Yes, and I think this is very relevant to schools, although I think I would say education institutions more widely.
Okay.
But yes, here we go. As Rebecca Allen and Sam Sims argue in The Teacher Gap, too many schools operate like sausage factories, churning through staff with casual disregard for their well-being. This is little short of a criminal squandering of a precious resource. We wring our hands about teacher recruitment and retention while burning through those we have at an unsustainable rate. A system that treats its people as disposable has no moral claim to be taken seriously. If we're careless of staff well-being, if we smash up careers and then retreat back into the justification that because we're more senior we therefore know best, other people are left to clean up the mess we make. Effective school leadership requires something like the principles of intelligent accountability. This appears to be a David Didow thing, the principles of intelligent accountability. And here are some of them. We need to know we are accountable to be our best. With the possible exception of a few saintly individuals, no one will be their best if they don't feel anyone cares what they do. We all need to be held to account for our choices and actions if we are able to overcome our natural inclination to do what's expeditious instead of what is right. We're most likely to improve when we feel trusted. Trust is not a soft option. In a school where trust exists, teachers feel safe to take risks, to be honest about difficulties and to ask for help. For schools to improve, teachers need to be able to be their best, not just look their best. And to be trusted, we must be trustworthy. Trustworthiness is made up of two elements, honesty and expertise. Honesty is more than not lying. It's avoiding Orwellian doublespeak. If we say we value kindness and then we treat people unkindly, what does that tell people? Or if we value clarity, but people are confused as to what we want them to do. And worst, when the value of urgency is enacted as expediency. We have to do what we say we'll do. When we overpromise and underdeliver, trust is eroded. Equality, this is interesting, equality is unfair. Most of the problems we face when trying to hold staff to account intelligently comes from the misguided belief that we should treat all teachers equally. But treating everyone the same is not the same as treating everyone fairly. Take promotion. Should all teachers have the opportunity to apply for a role? Of course. But what should the outcome be? Obviously, the person gets best suited to the role should get the job. Opportunities should be given equally. Outcomes should be based on what is most fair. In Why People Prefer Unequal Societies, Starmans, Sheskin and Bloom present a fascinating argument about human intuitions regarding fairness and inequality. They explore why people say they want equality but seem content to live in unequal societies. The answer lies in how we think about fairness. From early childhood, people show a preference not for strict equality but for fair inequality. When resources are shared, we're happy for those who work harder or contribute more to receive a greater share. We resent equal sharing of rewards when effort or merit differ. By contrast, when resources come by chance or windfall, people do expect equal division. Many inequalities in real societies persist not because people approve of inequality itself, but because they believe that it reflects differences in effort, talent, or contribution. Fairness recognises that people need different things to succeed, and designing systems that respond to those needs. Finally, autonomy needs to be earned. In too many schools, autonomy is granted by default or denied absolutely. Both approaches fail. The best schools make clear that autonomy is a prize, earned through effort, expertise, and reliability. When staff show they can uphold high standards, they deserve the space to innovate and flourish. When they can't, they need structure and support, not condemnation or abandonment. This principle also applies to leadership. Leaders earn the moral right to shape culture through their example, their fairness, and their willingness to listen. If these principles are ignored, schools run the risk of becoming places no one wants to work in. Of course, no one should ever have complete autonomy to do whatever they want, but we all want to be able to make meaningful choices about those things we are knowledgeable and passionate about. If we really want system-wide improvement, we must start holding schools to account intelligently for staff turnover. This could be done fairly easily. Every school submits workforce data to the DFE. We know exactly which schools retain staff and which burn them out. A school that hemorrhages staff year after year is a school that fails its people as much as its pupils. Inspection frameworks should take this seriously. Accountability systems can and should spotlight retention as a key indicator of a school's health.
Oh, there's a lot in there.
There's so much. Emma and I were sort of nodding and smiling at each other. I'm totally with him. Like, I think everything that he said in that, I'm thinking, yeah, it rings so many bells and like really sort of rings true from my experience.
You were in a trust.
I was going to
you?
say,
Yes.
I should say as well for listeners that haven't heard this before, that I used to work I used to work in a local authority school that then became an academy as a teacher. And then I moved to work for a large multi-academy trust in England. And then I moved into a role where I supported schools that were new to the academy trust. So some of that stuff about square peg, round hole stuff, kind of rings true, and the different people needing different things, and for some people it not being a fit. And then I moved into sort of a teacher development role within that as well. So I need to be careful what I say here, because I don't want to, name specific schools or examples, but there's definitely some stuff there around different people work in different ways, and that's okay, I think. And different people appreciate different approaches to systems and autonomy and things like that. There's some teachers for whom being told exactly what to do every day, given scripted lessons and all of this kind of tropes and stuff that happen apparently in certain schools, that would be their absolute worst nightmare, and they wouldn't want to work there in any way whatsoever. For other people, they might actually really love that and love that they're freed up to do pastoral stuff and feel that they've got the time to kind of make their lessons brilliant. But we might often have the same people in the same school.
Yeah.
And whether that's where some of that friction comes from, perhaps, so where different people want slightly different things from their job and feel the role of the teacher is slightly different.
Yeah, I'm sort of musing on the first bit about accountability, and I like the term intelligent accountability, because what seems to be within it as well, and maybe it would be too long if he added this word, but it's a caring accountability as well. And I feel quite strongly accountability can be a really prickly, can make you feel sort of really concerned, can't it? And it's a bit of can be a dirty word depending on how it's applied. So I'm really pleased to hear that he's taken the time to explain, why that can be a really good thing. I've got to be in my bonnet at the moment about, institutions, places, any kind of sort of establishment that has neither carrot nor stick. I'm not saying I'm an advocate of a stick, but something has got to make you can't assume that everybody's going to get up in the morning doing it for the love, doing it because they're passionate about it. Everyone's going to have their own reasons why. And therefore, you've got to sort of tap into, as you're saying, who that individual is, but also make sure that everyone is accountable. I think that is a minimum expectation in any institution that people need to sign up to. It feels almost like because so often we've heard about accountability cultures being very negative. It was discussed in Wales as being one of the reasons why the outgoing curriculum and education arrangements in Wales really failed, because we had a sort of toxic accountability culture, and what that did to staff autonomy and things like that. And we're starting to sort of go the other way, and we've given a lot of freedom, a lot of agency, but without that accountability, you get a lot of mixed practice. So I like how he's talked about it.
I think what I like about it is he broaches the subject of accountability in the context of absolutely going for those educational institutions that think they can just burn staff out and get rid of them. And I sort of think, I don't know, I don't have the figures to back this up. I sort of think that any institution, particularly schools, and let's talk about teaching because that's what we're all about, is school teaching. Any school that thinks that they can burn people out and there's going to be another load of teachers along shortly to take their place are living 20 years out of date. I mean, there were 50 something applicants for the job I got as an NQT. And now we know from speaking to David Egan, for example, quite recently, that there are schools who'll put a job out 3 times and not get a single applicant. So any school that thinks that they can get rid of staff because they've used, abused them, burnt them out, and there's going to be a nice new young fresh one along shortly is perhaps living in the past.
Yeah, deluded.
I think as well, in terms of schools as community organisations as well, like it's actually one of the things that parents care about the most, isn't it, is consistency of staff. Like especially, maybe I'm thinking from a primary perspective here, like there's something really special for lots of parents about a teacher having all of their children, say, and they've been there for, well, sometimes 20, 30 years. Obviously, there's pros and cons, aren't there, to people staying in one place for a very, very long time. But in terms of getting to know that community and getting to know the context, there's real value in embedding yourself into a school culture, I think. And when you have, say, 50% staff turnover every year, as some schools do. And this is something where I think in South Wales, like having come from London, we're actually in quite a strong position here because people do get a job that they intend to stay in. In London, we would have a sort of 3-4 year churn that I think was quite natural. Like people would be living in rented flats in central London in their 20s, and then they would move out, either home or to Surrey, home counties, etc. So you would kind of have like a bit of a natural churn almost. Whereas here, we don't have that so much. And I think that that's quite interesting that some schools are still really grappling with high staff retention, like high staff turnover and lack of staff retention, despite the fact that people get a job that they're intending to stay in. And then we've got the temporary contracts thing as well. And that's another sort of like people employing teachers not intending to keep them, which I think is quite interesting.
It also makes me think about those people or those schools that are at the other end of that earned autonomy scale. You know, we think about schools that have just, or even, teacher education partnerships who've just had a really horrendous inspection. And so they're kind of at the other end of the earned autonomy thing because they've got the inspectorate kind of breathing down their necks and all of that. And we sort of know, don't we, from our own experiences as well as what we see, that gets you into a place where you are just sort of doing point-at-able things to get them off your back.
Yeah.
And so actually you're trying to earn your autonomy, but there's no getting away from the fact that in the stage of trying to earn your autonomy, it's all on the terms of the person that gets to say what you have to do to earn the autonomy. And then you're just spending an awful lot of time doing an awful lot of quite performative stuff that you wouldn't be doing if you sort of didn't have a boot on your back.
And the other thing with that is that I quite strongly believe that there are certain schools that are harder to work in and to do well in than others. And I know that's maybe not the most politically correct thing to say, but actually, and I've seen this when leaders move from one school to another, maybe they're a very successful leader in school A and you put them in school B, which is more challenging, and actually they can't do the same level of job as they did in school A. And I think sometimes when we have this earned accountability model, you're punishing people who are working in the more challenging schools, despite the fact they might objectively be doing an actually better job. And if you were to take value added, and obviously they do have that now in England with Progress 8, don't they? You were to say, actually, this school, yes, the results are, if we go on a scale out of 10, the results are a 4, and this school has got an 8, but the progress score is a 10 and this school's got a 2.
Yeah.
So, and in Wales, we don't really have that progress measure, do we? So again, you've got some schools that might be doing an incredible job that aren't being recognised for it. And in some cases, people are coming in saying, you're doing a terrible job. Let's put these people in charge of you. You've got to earn your autonomy from them who couldn't do the job that you're doing in that school.
And that's why it's got to be intelligent.
Yeah,
That's why.
I was thinking we used to have the crazy banding system, didn't we? The colour banding system in Wales, where it was all about making progress. So if everything stayed the same, you started going down.
Yeah.
And so if you were already in a good place in the colour banding system, you started looking for the thing that you could make better, and it got more and more and more specific. So by the end, you'd be like, oh, if we're going to stay green, we've got to look at kids in year 8 who've got between 94 and 97% 97.5% attendance and make that number better. And then, and then those kids are getting bussed into school like in handcuffs and everyone else is getting ignored. So as the minute you start to try to measure something, which you're going to have to do if you're going to put in a place of earning autonomy, you're going to get crazy stuff going on, aren't you?
I really like that emphasis on dignity, teacher dignity,
Yes.
a tool for making that possible being justify your retention rates. What's going on there? And let's dig into that. And, how are you? And I like that you didn't like you also said, Sean, there might be some teachers for whom the new direction of travel is not for them, but you've done everything that you can, and then you give them a dignified send off because they have given a lot to that school so easily, as you said, Tom, as well. You just chuck them on the rubbish heap because you're of the past, and all of that work, all that service that they've given.
And there are, you don't have to be in this business very long before you start spotting certain jobs that keep coming up. I used to spot it when I was a teacher. There was a certain music department, which clearly I'm not going to name, where the sort of non-headed department music job used to come up year after year after year, or 2 years maximum. But the real thing was, this was a really high-flying, really desirable school. This was the sort of school where first time you come up, you'd be like, oh, the job's come up at XYZ school. And then the next year you'd be like, oh, that job's come up again. And then you go, oh, that job's come up again. And I remember when I started this job, actually mischievously asking somebody in that school the first time I got to visit, what's going on? And they sort of said, oh, well, they obviously just can't handle pressure, can they?
Yeah. I had a really interesting conversation with a school leader many years ago, in a completely different country, we'll say, where I questioned the staff retention rates. And I said, I think one of the major problems that you are having is that we're losing a lot of staff every year. And I remember they said to me, high staff turnover is a characteristic of high-performing organisations, Sian. And honestly, I was so shocked. It completely floored me. And then they had some stats, they sort of listed various organisations and their staff turnover rates and was like, we're under it. So clearly somebody had talked to them about it. And they'd gone away and done some research and found some responses that backed up the argument that it didn't matter.
Yes, and that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying it's not as simple as, because a school like that does that can come up with that answer could also play that, oh, well, we've got a system of earn to count. They could use that language and be sort of semi-convincing, but then you scratch beneath the surface and you go, no, you haven't done the work that you need to do to actually live that and roll that out culturally within your academy trust, within your school.
Nothing like doing research to try to find out the thing you want to find out, is there?
Yeah.
To get the answer you're looking for.
Yeah. Well, David Didow, you gave us a lot to discuss.
We've got a lot
there.
to say about that, haven't we?
We have.
We could probably do an hour-long episode just on that, I reckon, Tom.
Yeah. Sean, what are you taking us to next?
I've got something shorter. There we go. And quite random. It's a blog that I came across and I just thought it was quite interesting. So I've brought it along. It's called Cycling in Oxford, A Tale of Four Schools. So we're over the border again. We've got an England theme. And we're thinking about 4 different schools that have got different approaches to cycling. So 58% of the children at Cherwell Secondary School in North Oxford cycle to school. Probably the second highest cycling rate for a UK secondary school. In contrast, just 10 children at Cheney Secondary School cycle to school. 41% of children at Lark Rise Primary in East Oxford cycle to school. In contrast, just 12% of children at Windmill Primary in Headington cycle to school. For the primary schools, cycling include being cycled. So you're on the back, you're in a little buggy thing. This is not a result of different school policies or priorities. Cheney has an active sustainable travel group and encourages cycling. It is a trendsetter with its e-bike loan scheme for staff, and Windmill has a strong commitment to sustainability. Nor is it an obvious result of demographics or catchment size. All 4 schools were oversubscribed and filled their intakes in 2024-25. Cherwell's 18.3% free school meal pupils is lower than Cheney's 24.1%, but Lark Rise's 17.2% is higher than Windmill's 7.1%. So one of the schools with high cycling has got a higher free school meals and one has got a lower one. So it's not necessarily linked. Headington may be on a hill, but there are no big gradient differences affecting Windmill's catchment, and only part of Cheney's catchment is down the hill in East Oxford, so in an area of less affluence in Oxford. Cherwell's North Oxford catchment area consists almost entirely of low traffic neighbourhoods, and the bits of cycling infrastructure along and across Woodstock and Banbury roads that are needed for the school run are workable, even if awkward and substandard. And Cherwell is connected to its Marston catchment by the Marston Ferry Road cycle track, one of the few really good pieces of cycling infrastructure in the city. Larkrise has low traffic neighbourhoods covering all of its catchment, and in this case we can observe the effects of infrastructure directly. The introduction of low traffic neighbourhoods in 21-22 increased Larkrise's cycling modal share from 23 to 41%. I'm going to pause there. What do you think? Why do you think we've got these two schools that have got really high rates of cycling and then these two other schools really low rates? Have you got any guesses? Any thoughts of what the answer might be? Because the author gives an answer.
Gosh. Could be so many different things. I wasn't wondering what the answer was. I was musing on how various different things can impact. I was thinking about town planning. I was thinking about,
You're on the right lines.
Yeah, I wondered if I can't pinpoint what it is, but yeah, I'm going to stop there because Tom might.
No,
might
I
know
was
the
I was
answer.
just getting intrigued because you were talking about low traffic neighbourhoods, which of course the conspiracy theory du jour, aren't they? I was thinking perhaps it was going in that direction, but no, I don't know.
We're not sure.
We're not sure.
Windmill's catchment is cut across by streets carrying high volumes of motor traffic, especially at school run times. There is a school street system, but it only covers a tiny area immediately outside the school gates. And for many, it is impossible to avoid the main roads. Then it goes into some sort of detail about the specific different roads in Oxford that I won't go into. But essentially, the two schools with low cycling rates are both by a very main road that you can't avoid. So whatever these schools are doing, it's not going to have that. They can't move the school. They can't move it. They're on this kind of main road. Children being able to cycle to school is also an indicator of broader accessibility. If the streets and roads are safe enough for parents to cycle on with younger children and let older children cycle on by themselves, then they will also be accessible to frailer and less confident adults. So I just thought that was really interesting, that you've got these four schools. They're actually not that close, because I looked at the comments of the blog and a load of people said it'd be really helpful to see them on a map. So I put the schools in a map, and actually Oxford's quite small, but they're kind of in different bits of Oxford really. But this kind of presence of this one particularly large road, basically any kind of environmental, any sort of sustainability measures that schools are putting in place just aren't going to help.
Yeah, and it's making me think that sometimes it involves looking at the problem in a completely different way. The first thing I read that really hit home to me about this was something I've talked about on the podcast before, called Invisible Women. I think it's by Caroline Credo Perez. I'm going to check that afterwards.
It is. She's been recommended so many times on something interesting that I have her.
Oh, there we go.
Embedded
You've got it
in my
committed to memory.
Yes.
And just about how historically sort of patriarchal sort of men have been sort of predominantly and dominant on boards who make decisions about town planning and infrastructure, have inadvertently in many cases created inequities and issues for women because they're not thinking about those issues. And so this is another one where it's like, okay, we're going to put the school there. I don't know whether that school was next to that major. I've actually been on that bypass really recently. Actually went to a wedding in Oxford, and it is a very fast and scary road. So I can see that. And we don't know, do we? Maybe that road came afterwards. But looking at the problem slightly differently, through a geographical, through a economical lens, can unlock something about it that hadn't occurred to you in the first place.
Yeah, and if one of those schools with 58% was asked to hold the lower school to account, right, they're not going to be able to help. They can't move the school, can they?
No. Very interesting. Okay, well, it's kind of a nice segue, not because the content is the same, but just this idea of, you look at a particular issue and it can shed light on a whole other thing that you hadn't occurred to you before. So I have been listening to a podcast from BBC Sounds called Child, presented by India Rakisson. And it occurred to me that I am very much a secondary school teacher. Like that's where I feel most comfortable. I like working with adolescents. People tend to, but not all people, but tend to sort of have a preference for a particular setting. But I think the more I've been sort of hearing perspectives on the podcast, collaborating with primary practitioners like yourself, Sian, the more I've come to realise that I don't know enough. I don't know enough about child development. I don't know enough about how young children develop and how they learn. And I really ought to. I really ought to spend more time knowing about that. So this podcast is a new look at the beginnings of life. We tell the story of a child from fertilisation to first birthday through the lens of society, history, and science. And I think this is what makes this podcast really interesting, is that it uses those different lenses and brings in people with sort of different research backgrounds, expertise, experience, jobs, all sort of oscillating around the child, the new parent, the new birthing person, all of that. And the episode that I wanted to play a little clip from is entitled Nursery. My sister is actually a nursery practitioner here in Wales. Listeners might not know that Wales is one of the most expensive places to send your children to nursery in the UK, second only to London. And notoriously, practitioners who work in nursery settings are very poorly paid. But it was a clip at the end of the episode, and this episode is about, whenever an infant heads to nursery, it can feel like an enormous step, changes for everybody. So it deals with some of those things. But the bit I want to play to you is a bit where India, the presenter, meets artists Conway and Young, who found a way to make the invisible labour of childcare pay visible. So let's have a listen.
Call for applications. I am committed to the role described and have 20 plus years experience of caring for my own body.
Does that sound familiar?
I have 13 years experience working in universities, and I am responsive to working in new contexts and the challenges that come with it.
This isn't just any old job application.
I am aware of the long hours and unpredictable working patterns and can be resourceful and flexible when necessary.
This is for the role of a mother. Meet Conway and Young, or more personally, Jen and Jess. They are artists and educators. What you heard just then was some of the words for a piece that they made called The Milk Report.
Both of us had a bit of time away caring, me for a baby, Jen for someone else. We returned after this period of it quite intense caring, and we wanted to make something of that period.
Being a mum is just seen as being a mum, not the crazy adaptation, transformation, life skill that it really is. But something that Jess did during that time was empirical evidence.
Every time I had fed my baby for the first 6 months, I had written down the start time and the end time, and whether it was the left breast or the right breast.
So they took the data and they turned it into a statement. Even though it's through the lens of breastfeeding, it probes at the wider politics and economics of care.
So when we added up all of the hours or the minutes that I had spent feeding, it comes to 720 hours and 7 minutes.
Whoa.
We decided that we would produce 720 copies and we would sell it for the hourly living wage rate, but in 2019, which was £8.21. So that each copy of Milk Report we sold, we would be able to pay me an hour of that work.
I bought a copy. There are 2 pamphlets, one pink, one blue. The blue one is a narrative of the personal changes Jess experienced. And then in the pink pamphlet, it's quite amazing. It's just pages and pages of numbers and minutes.
I needed that in order to convince myself that there was real work, and to almost convince other people that there was this real, intensive, very hard work happening, which is totally ridiculous because I was doing it.
The work that you're doing as a carer in any form, it feeds into the capitalist economy that we exist in.
Even if it's not counted in terms of the economy, it is there and it is happening. So the fact that a person is feeding their baby and caring for their baby intensely for 6 months means another person is able to be in waged work. Like, of course, I think you should realise that before it happens to you, but often that is how it happens. We're suddenly in the middle of it thinking, okay, actually this work is allowing some other things to carry on and to take place, but it's invisible. It's invisible in the way that things are kind of counted up in terms of the economy.
The value to the UK economy of unpaid care in England and Wales is estimated to be around £162 billion. Though, of course, we can't truly know the number, and not the specific number for childcare. But then, why bother putting a value on something as unimportant as bringing up a human?
162 billion.
It's a big number.
Yeah, so I don't know, this just really captured my attention, and it sort of it could take you to lots of different places, but it took me to places where I was thinking, you know, not often, but we can sometimes sort of vilify some birthing parents and parents, mothers, for not giving their kid a great start in terms of reading and whatever. But do we really value some of the most basic human needs, and do we really sort of, I don't know, shine a light on some of the most seemingly basic, although I think anybody who has ever tried to breastfeed will probably tell you that it's not basic and neither is it simple. Things, most fundamental things, but what that actually has, the impact that has on our economy, and what the upshot of that is. So it really caught me between the eyes. I haven't got a lot else to say about that.
Oh gosh, yeah, this is you're speaking my language here, Emma, with unpaid labour for women and parents in general,
Yes,
right? Like it's not necessarily just women who do this care, although the data doesn't lie, does it? It is the vast majority of women. And I remember when I had my son back in 2019, hey, there we go, I could have done this if I'd been inclined to at that point. I remember being shocked by, this is the point where we can't have equality anymore in our marriage, because I'm the one who's pregnant, I'm the one who's giving birth, and then I'm the one who breastfeeds, essentially. And obviously you don't have to choose to do that, but there's a lot of kind of evidence that it's quite a good thing to try to do. Yeah. So there's no way that we could be equal anymore. And then that's the same with careers and things. Before we had children, me and my husband were basically living the same life, you know? And then when I was on maternity leave, we're living completely different lives all of a sudden. And it happens in sort of, it's not the blink of an eye, because you kind of know it. There's some indicators, aren't there, that it's coming.
Yeah.
But then when you get there, all of a sudden you're living this completely different life, and you're making perhaps different choices. And obviously the thing that happens at this point is that often the status quo is set, that the person who's doing the caring then knows how to do the caring. And then the other person, be that man or woman, needs to learn how to do it in order to get back to that kind of equal status. And obviously it doesn't happen, really.
Yeah.
And then, the point around it's being unpaid labour, and it's being the majority women's labour, and linked then into nurseries as well, is definitely the case. Like, it is majority women working in this kind of early education sector.
Yeah, and it got me thinking about that sort of intelligent accountability a little bit, and the point around equality. I remember hearing Nadia Hussein, who won Great British Bake Off back in 2015, talk about her marriage and her relationship. And she was saying, I feel like we need to move away from this idea that everything in a relationship, and you could maybe talk about that in terms of, a professional working relationship being 50-50, everything equally split. But actually it's more intelligent and probably more equitable to kind of go, this isn't equal. So and they took it to this extreme in a good way by quantifying it, by going, okay, this many minutes, this is what it's equivalent to in terms of, the minimum wage at that point in time. But only from that place of understanding and bringing the invisible into the light, can you start to go, okay, right, so we're gonna have to change things up a little bit, because oftentimes it's not through malice, it's just through an ignorance that just has never occurred to you from not having that lived experience.
And also on both sides as well. Because often I think people who do the caring, you get used to doing it in a certain way.
Yeah.
And then to get back to that place, there's an element of give and take. Like, you can't expect it to be done your way and also expect somebody else to do it. And often that can be very challenging, I think, especially when you're talking like parenting decisions, like things that you might be doing that, like, it's a negotiation from both sides. It's not a matter of one person should do more. It's an active act to start doing less as well.
Thinking back to your Caroline Criado Perez point, I am still here, by the way.
Sorry, Tom.
Some of this...
Maybe it's the use of the term, like the breastfeeding. Tom's like, I'll leave this to the people.
Well, I'm going to make the very intelligent decision not to weigh in on breastfeeding. But what I am going to do is I'm going to say, that you've made the point, there are things where there's very little choice and, it's going to be one way or the other. And it's a very good thing to record it. But thinking about that book, which so many people have recommended on the podcast, there's so many things where actually the assumption is still there and the structures are still there. I mean, I know that I probably get drummed out of Podcast Club for having said I haven't actually read that book yet, but a lot of the book talks about the fact that stuff is made with men in mind, and then poor old women have to kind of, wrap themselves around it or fit themselves into it or whatever. It does work the other way round as well. There's an assumption that a woman's going to do something, and so it's made for a woman. I mean, my personal bugbears are kitchen counters and ironing boards because, people who don't know me, I'm 6 feet tall, and getting an ironing board and a kitchen counter that doesn't destroy my back, because it is assumed probably still that I'm not going to be doing any ironing because I'm a bloke. Actually, I quite like ironing.
Baby changing in toilets.
Yes, in the ladies' toilets,
it's
but not the
always
men.
in the ladies'
Yes.
toilets.
Yeah.
When my son was very small, just pre-COVID, it probably was March 2020, maybe end of February, I went to a hen party and we had to bring the baby because I was breastfeeding. And we're in this lovely pub in London and I'm doing all the hen party activities, we're making outfits, etc. What do I have to do? Got to change the baby's nappy, despite the fact my husband is there with the baby, because the only baby changing facilities are in the ladies' toilets.
That is noticeable now, isn't it? Because some places you go, they have got them in both.
Yeah.
But it just makes it more noticeable when you go to a place where they haven't.
Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of assumption that it will always be women, and also the lack of men in those spaces as well.
Yeah.
My husband and I both work a 4-day week. So he has a non-working day and he goes to a baby and toddler class. Do we want to guess how many men are in the room? It is just him and about 19 women. And occasionally there'll be one other dad there. And that's interesting, right? Like, Fridays is quite a common day to have off. And yet still, it's often women who go part-time, right? And why is that? Why is it that more women than men go to university now? Women get higher qualifications. And yet still, when children come along, it's the women's careers that tend to take the hit. I have to say as well, I think, speaking personally, I can be my own worst enemy sometimes. Like, every now and again, we'll have a conversation about whether one of us should go a bit more part-time, the juggle's hard, 2 young kids, etc. And often it'll be my husband saying to me, I care about your career as well. Like, I don't want you to take another day off because it's gonna, you might not feel it's gonna hit your career, but it will.
Yeah.
And again, we need men to be championing equality as well as women. It's not, it's not a one-way street.
And if you are the only dad out of 28, that can actually be a bit awkward.
Totally.
Get your tiny violin out, listeners, but
100%.
can feel a little bit, I mean, because it is definitely a thing that sometimes, women's spaces will get claimed just as sort of hungrily by the women. Then it's like, oh, hello, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
Not that I'm fishing for sympathy here, but it definitely can feel a bit weird sometimes. Interesting though that, like I said, I live in the middle of Cardiff, and you get as many dads as mums at the school gate now, I notice, in the primary schools.
Yeah,
round
I've been
here.
surprised by that as well.
Yeah.
It's very gender. Like, my son's just started reception. I'd say it's 50-50.
Yeah.
Mums and dads. I wonder whether, working from home,
Yeah.
that's having a big impact there, isn't it? But hopefully this is going to be, a step in the right direction, hopefully.
Yeah.
So there we go.
Oh, it's me.
My final offering.
I'm back on. Right. Lost my notes. Right. Something completely different. Actually, no, not something completely different. Something potentially linked. I have an article from The Guardian which, as only The Guardian can, has taken a thing that is really quite basic and written about an 8 billion word think piece about it as if it's completely new and nobody's ever heard of it before, possibly because it's the latest obsession of, you know, the sort of people who write for The Guardian.
Fan of The Guardian, are you?
I have critiques of all media outlets, and my critique of The Guardian is that they can spin 10,000 words out of something incredibly basic because it's suddenly become exciting to those people. So this one is about wall planners. Because apparently, you know, some enterprising soul has managed to make them the next big thing. Our wall planner is pinned to a large corkboard in the kitchen, structured month by month in rows. It is Parma violet, coral pink and butter yellow, and huge. A good metre long, almost the size of the table beneath it. I wield my felt tip pen, marking up school plays and holidays with our weird inscrutable code. I do feel calmer, as if I'm scooping out my brain and smearing it all over the paper, leaving me free to track down more stuff to fill it with. The annual wall planner is not new, at least they're honest. Most offices have one, albeit in fiscal reds and blacks, but judging by my neighbours' walls, these giant, brightly coloured versions are becoming more of a domestic endemic. Ryman has launched a colourful vertical version for £5 that is presumably for the backs of doors, while Butler and Hill offers a wipe-clean perpetual wall planner that can be used year after year. It's hard to know if they're more popular now than before, but, and this is where I lose my faith in humanity, on a recent trawl of Etsy, home of the cute packaged as commerce, I lost track after scrolling through more than 200 versions. Michelle Ferran started Good Tuesday, which is where I bought my planner from her home in Cornwall in 2020 during the pandemic. The mother of three now ships thousands to more than 30 countries every year. Customers have told her the calendars have helped their time blindness and productivity. Others even talk about their usefulness in neurodivergent households. Ferran relies on hers for the big stuff rather than the basics. She has ADHD and says it brings calm among the digital overload. On the one hand, I love my planner. It's the easiest way for us to navigate the hellscape of the summer holidays, and one damn thing that I haven't outsourced to my phone. On the other, it can be overwhelming. In February, the weeks stretched out with raw possibility. Yes, I had a root canal, but look at all that recovery time. 4 months later, it resembles a magic eye, dizzying and unreadable, except to those fluent in our code. Sometimes looking at this record of my family's life while I eat my Weetabix, I wonder how helpful they actually are. There is too much scheduling, says Dr. Martha Deiros Corredo. Busyness is too valued in society. All this hyper-productivity, however positive some of it is, over just being present isn't healthy, particularly for children. We need to protect small moments in life. Indeed, the moral panic around keeping children occupied with extracurriculars is real. Seeing your life writ large like that also has the adverse effect of showing you a Tuesday afternoon woefully unfilled. But so too is the adult equivalent. As I've learned, it's never enough simply to be too busy. Whether you're posting on social media or staying late in the office, everyone needs to know how full your life is. Otherwise, what's the point? Sarah Jaffe is an American Labour journalist and author of the very quotable Work Won't Love You Back. Ain't that the truth? She thinks the overemphasis on planning started with COVID, which forced parents to manage the schedule of everyone in the home, whether they're working or not. Though the same could be said for anyone trying and failing to have a spontaneous post-work pint or swim in the local pool. Post-pandemic, some aspects of life have returned to normal, but others, such as working from home or hybrid working, have stuck around. With hybrid working, every day has a new configuration, says Jaffa. All in all, it's a toxic combination when it comes to planning your week, let alone year. Even if you have an unscheduled evening, you still feel the need to fill that, says Jaffa, who is recently taking up knitting as a way to stop doom scrolling. But even that has become another deadline with which to beat herself. We're now far more aware of the limit of our free time, which has in a way led to us optimising that too. It's like, just how many ways can we find to overschedule ourselves? In theory, the calendar has skin in both games, she says. One movement is about more free time, the other about time as a shorthand for money or work. Except, she says, just as intimate labour, such as childcare and so on, it's almost like we planned it, blurs the line between what we think should be done for love and what we think should be done for money. The same blurring of work and home has led us to feel the need to manage and schedule every part of our lives. There's an argument that they're even a little class-coded. Obviously, we need to plan things, but a lot of people's lives and work don't fall into that same rhythm, she says, such as delivery and Uber drivers and those on 0 hours contracts. Planning is privileged. It's even, she argues, gender-coded. Those bright, colourful calendars, who are they really for? Collado says that this stuff tends to fall to the woman, and that's probably why these calendars are skewed aesthetically towards them. Ultimately, if your calendar is too full, it's probably because you're working too much or struggling for time outside work on account of capitalism exploiting you, or at the very least, encouraging a culture which values productivity in whatever form it takes over everything else. She thinks sometimes planners and calendars can become a sort of metric for business and productivity. And where productivity can be tracked with increasing accuracy, so too can failure. So what's the answer? Collado suggests planning, not planning. I tend to not plan things across the year. Using tape, we'll block one weekend a month. If someone asks them to go for lunch or out that weekend, she simply says they have plans. Not planning for us involves rest, pottering about, sitting in pyjamas, which is why when you look at my calendar, a lot is deliberately white. In this way, the wall planner can be a helpful bouncer-like presence, gatekeeping rare and precious, genuinely free time. Collado implemented not planning after the birth of her second child. My time is more stretched, and if you don't protect it, before you know it, it's gone and you become resentful. You could think of these non-planned moments as fallow time, essential to recovery and long-term health. We all struggle with a work-life balance, and often planning is an essential part of our lives. But so too is having unstructured free time. It may be the only way, at least for parents, to salvage something organic, something spontaneous. We should be more deliberate with our time.
I like the idea that we're all secretly Glastonbury and we need a fallow weekend every now and again to let our grass grow again.
Yeah, that's a nice idea. Yeah.
But yes, this whole... I was taken with this whole my children must always be doing an extracurricular activity attitude, which is one that I absolutely do not sign up to.
Yeah, I've been reading some stuff just lately, again, with this sort of, I don't know enough about how children develop, and things to do with sort of giving them time to be creative and to sustain a task and be bored and know how to self-regulate, which is not necessarily going to come easy, and you'll be able to tell me more about this because I don't have any children. But, you know, if everything is, oh, you've got a thing for this and you've got a thing for that, and, you know, constantly keeping them occupied, when do they learn just how to make their own fun? Sounds like very archaic back in the day. It sounds like the 4 Yorkshiremen skit, doesn't it? We ate gravel and walked about 40 miles to school.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's partly the over-scheduling thing is partly down to the disconnect, isn't it, between the school year and then the kind of working year? Because often I will sometimes feel like, oh my gosh, I should be, you know, doing more extracurricular stuff. And then I'll talk to other people and they're using it as childcare, really. You know, it's not necessarily about the activity. It's about the fact that and again, it's a privilege, isn't it, to be able to take time off and be part-time, and also it's a privilege to be able to afford the different childcare options. But yeah, I definitely think it's almost a bit fashionable. I'm not surprised it's in the Guardian to be like, we're living a slow life. I'm aiming for like a slow childhood. Like it's kind of screen free. Have you guys come across 1,000 Hours Outside? Have you seen this? No. So this is it's a podcast, but it's also like they probably call themselves a movement. That's what they probably say. And I don't necessarily agree with everything they stand for, but their kind of principle is that we should be aiming for 1,000 hours outdoors every year, which actually is a lot. If you think there's 365 days in a year, right? Yeah. You're talking 3 hours every day outside, or, you know, some days with 6 hours. And I think that's quite interesting that we're shifting to this focus perhaps in certain areas of society around, actually, we need to get away from being indoors, we need to be more outdoors, and also we need to get away from scheduling every minute to being more free and more flexible and more fluid. Because it feels to me anyway like there's a bit of a shift kind of in terms of culture.
Yeah, and it's making me reflect on some of the debate around the length of summer holidays as well, and like who does and does not benefit from that, and the point the article makes about, you know, people who are disadvantaged by certain things, such as, you know, those who are Uber Eats, and, you know, who are freelancers, who are 0 hours contracts and stuff. And it's all very well and good, isn't it, to talk like this? But for some people, that's a privilege that they just do not have.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a culture around the whole like trad wife thing, which is quite now, isn't it? Maybe it won't be now at Easter next year, maybe. But like
we've shown our hand now.
But actually, like, it's presented as a choice being a stay-at-home mother, isn't it? Whereas for lots of people, it's not actually a choice, because their salary wouldn't be enough to cover one or more children in childcare to start with. And then when you move to school, the cost of childcare for wraparound and things like that is so extensive that perhaps the choice for that family is for one parent to stay at home. And then for reasons that we discussed earlier, often that ends up being the woman. But yeah, the kind of over-scheduling of free time is definitely a thing, isn't it?
Yeah, that idea of that sort of guilt about them not having an experience all the time. And yet, weirdly, I mean, schools are really quite intense, aren't they? I mean, my kids are absolutely shattered when they get home. And I just think, why would I bundle them into the car and take them to do something else? My God, they look like they need to lie down.
It does make you wonder if COVID supercharged it, because we had a lot of that unstructured time where we were, you know, in lockdown, and, you know, normally they would have been in school, and that is highly structured, and they do need a bit of that. But then when you're a parent that's got, you know, all of that, you know, it was the great, I wouldn't necessarily, I would probably critique this term, but it's like the great leveler, wasn't it? Because we were all in sort of similar circumstances. And so maybe that sort of had an effect on it, that we, you know, in order to manage this situation, we're actually going to start structuring our days a bit more, and we're going to schedule in things, and we're going to try this activity. And so maybe that supercharged it a little bit.
Maybe. I don't know. Who knew a wall planner could be so many things? The Guardian were right to write that huge article about it.
Do we have wall planners? Team podcast?
No.
No?
I did for a year, and didn't really sort of stick to it, because I'm very wedded to my electronic calendar on my phone.
Same. I'm digital. I've got a full shared Google Calendar. It is colour coded though. Everyone's got their own colour. Different activities got different colours.
Yeah.
So, you know, visual.
Are they gender coded colours?
No, I think they're deliberately not gender coded colours, but maybe almost like in a slightly ostentatious way that maybe we should have just gender coded them.
Sian, you're up next, and you've got the final offering.
I have. And I'm looking ahead to the summer. Because here we are, it's Easter, and we're all thinking about one thing. I can guarantee it. And this headline, this is an FT article, and it's by John Byrne Murdoch. Do we remember him? Off the charts of COVID fame. You know, he made all of those kind of visuals.
Oh,
yeah. So there's lots of charts in here, which obviously is a great choice for a podcast. It's very visual.
It's like that time I brought political
love a
cartoons.
chart.
I love
you?
a chart.
The
Love a chart.
numeracy in you.
So the title of this is Britain and Europe Need to Get Serious About Air Conditioning. Hence the summer link. So in a rapidly warming world, a former extravagance is becoming a necessity. And I picked this because of this incredible opening paragraph. Are you ready for it? When the late Singaporean Premier Lee Kuan Yew was asked for the secret of his nation's rapid rise from doldrums to dynamism during the second half of the 20th century, he had two answers. First, multi-ethnic tolerance in a diverse society. Second, air conditioning. I just love that so much.
Yeah.
He's kind of, Singapore is so successful because of air conditioning. But he goes on. Lee, who prioritised the installation of air conditioners in government offices when he came to power in 1959, hailed the technology as one of the single inventions of history and a key to increasing the efficiency of Singapore's civil service. While the precise contribution of air conditioning to the Singaporean miracle is hard to quantify, there is no question that the ability to keep cool in hot climates is enormously valuable. Once indoor temperatures rise above the low 20s centigrade or around 75 Fahrenheit, humans start to suffer. Sleep duration and quality fall rapidly when temperatures rise above 23 degrees Celsius. Cognitive performance fares similarly, with scores in US high school tests dipping on hot days and the affected students suffering a lasting impact on their prospects of graduation. The same is true for office workers' productivity, which peaks at around 21 degrees Celsius and rapidly deteriorates as the mercury rises. And that's all before we get on to mortality, where death rates climb steeply once temperatures hit 30 degrees Celsius. The key word here is indoor. All of these bleak outcomes can be avoided if the interiors of homes, schools and offices can be kept at a comfortable temperature, even as the sun beats down outside. And while careful building design, passive cooling and other adaptations can offer some protection, once temperatures get high enough, only air conditioning can make a real difference. As a result, with heat waves rapidly increasing in frequency around the world, the wide US-Europe disparity in air conditioning use is becoming reflected in a startlingly wide disparity in heat-related deaths. Between 2000 and 2018, an average of 83,000 Western Europeans lost their lives every year as a result of extreme heat, compared with 20,000 North Americans. Yet, despite rising human toll, air conditioning remains widely frowned upon in the UK and Europe, with consistent and concerted pushback from those who consider the technology an unnecessary extravagance and one that does more harm from good. I have some sympathy with this, at least superficially. Air conditioning uses a lot of energy. If the proposed defence against emissions-driven global warming means emitting more, then we have an obvious problem. But two key parts of the calculus here are changing rapidly. The first is the extent to which air conditioning is necessary. European cities are enduring more intense heat more frequently and for longer periods than just a decade or two ago. Hot nights, where the risks to health are highest and air conditioning adds the most value, are rising fastest of all. This year, London is experiencing as much heat as Portland, Oregon, 18 days and counting of temperatures requiring active cooling. But without Portland's cooling infrastructure, 79% of households there have air conditioning. The results will not be pretty. And the second shift is that rising demand for air conditioning now aligns with rapidly rising supply of solar energy. The overwhelming majority of increased energy demand in the coming years will be supplied by clean sources, and that supply will also be most abundant when it is most needed for cooling. Moreover, the potential for air-to-heat pumps to take care of all the building's temperature needs without burning gas means the net impact on emissions could be negative. Far from encouraging this, regulations in countries, including the UK and France, continue to disincentivize and even restrict these technologies. Meanwhile, others argue against their adoption on the basis that it will widen health and other inequalities. The reverse is true, according to the author. Unless authorities begin to treat the need for sufficient cooling as seriously as the need for adequate heating and fulfill their duty to protect the most vulnerable, inequalities will widen as high-income households fork out for their own protection and leave the rest sweating. Not too long ago, there were sound arguments against Europe adopting air conditioning en masse, but the climate has changed. And one interesting chart that I'm going to describe, because we can't see it, is there's a chart that says school learning, percentage annual learning loss. And it goes down to -1% as the temperature rises from 20 degrees Celsius to 30 degrees Celsius. So as it gets hotter, work productivity goes down, and also learning goes down in schools as well. So there we go. This was a dinner table conversation, admittedly not between me, between two economists, one that I live with and a friend who was visiting. And I thought, that's actually really interesting, isn't it? Like, is air conditioning something that's going to be becoming more and more prevalent in the UK and Europe? Should we have air conditioning? Do we have air conditioning?
I find this triggering. Body temperature. I mean, Tom and I inhabit the hottest and coldest office on campus. It is horrific in the summer, inhabitable in the summer and in winter.
Equally uninhabitable in winter, I would say, in the opposite direction, yes.
Yes. And we've talked about this on the podcast before. Like, you're more comfortable in a colder environment.
Yeah, I don't like the heat. I don't like the heat, and I prefer very much don't like the cold.
Why, this is why we can't have nice things. This is why we've just wrecked the world, isn't it? Because global warming and now this. We're quite comfortable as a nation with heating systems. It's not okay to be working in a climate and work. Aren't there? Here's a question. I don't know the answer to this. There is a lower limit, isn't there? That if the temperature falls between a certain point, then you shouldn't have to work. Is it the same?
I think so. I think there's an upper limit. I definitely remember one extremely hot summer in school, them hiring a load of air conditioning units because it wasn't. I don't know whether that was like just kind of goodwill from school leadership because it was so hot, or whether it was actually a legal limit. But I think there's a certain level of heat There must be, right?
There must
be
be,
a certain
yeah.
level of heat that you can't work at.
But why are we so stoic about heat, about being hot? You know, like it's you know, we can put up with that. But
Because we're British, Emma.
we are very British.
We have a thermal comfort policy.
Did you just?
Yes. Because I noticed it when they brought it in and I thought,
That's interesting.
have they been in our office?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, the thermal comfort policy. I was also thinking a number of thoughts came to mind. First of all, you mean Singapore didn't mention their really high-performing education system as one of the main drivers?
He
of their
didn't.
success
Air
there?
conditioning and
Shocking.
multi-ethnic integration.
Yeah.
Those two sides of the same coin, right?
I was also reminded of when I was young and foolish, I was on a camping trip in Italy during the 2003, the infamous 2003 heat wave that killed hundreds of thousands of people in continental Europe. And I was in
You were in a tent.
Italy, yeah, in a tent. The daytime temperature was regularly hitting 38 degrees C. It was horrible. Absolutely horrible.
I feel like we've solved the world's problems in this one episode. We all need 1,000 hours a year of outside.
Yeah.
We need air conditioning. We need to be in intelligently accountable working environments, cultures. What else? We need to talk about the invisible labour that goes on in our households. What have I missed?
Well, I mean,
We've just cracked it.
having laboured long and hard to build us a temporary studio because of the building work going on around our normal studio, whoever that was during this episode that started mowing the grass outside needs to leave the employment of the university forthwith.
Yeah, we've had it all, haven't we, on this episode? We've had people talking loudly outside the studio doors. We've had power tools. We've had all kinds of things going on. But hopefully,
1,000 episodes outside. We should just give up and just record outside. I think.
and once again, we've got a live episode that had a completely fluke line of sort of inquiry, maybe a bit of a fancy way of talking it, but we were united with some of those themes, weren't we?
People are still going to think we show each other in advance. We don't.
We don't.
They definitely don't.
Total fluke. So there you have it. Hopefully you found those offerings interesting, albeit not so light this time. That was just a fluke too. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back with you in 2 weeks' time.
You've been listening to Emma and Tom Talk Teaching, a podcast about all things education, presented by Emma O'Dooher, Sian Wickersham and Tom Breeze. We hope you enjoyed our usual Easter fun and games. Podcast artwork is by Beth Blandford and the music is by Cameron Stewart. I'm off to cross my fingers that nothing in this ages badly in the 9 months between recording and release, and that if it does, I spot it in time for a speedy re-edit. We'll be back in a fortnight, cancellation permitting, with something else interesting. Until then, take care and enjoy teaching.